Hello, hello. Welcome to the Work Podcast. Hi.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm Britt here with Laura Chung, and we have the incredible pleasure to chat with Shante Little, who is just so brilliant. I've been following you on the gram for a bit, and when you commented on, I can't remember what post you commented on that sort of gave me the push I needed to reach out to you. Was it a post from Dr. Rocio, I believe? Is that
Hair medicine?
Yes.
Hair medicine.
No, hair medicine. That's Maddie Lou, who was also one of our guests from season 1, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And it was exciting to see the worlds intersect. So, hi. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. No, I love, it's one of my favorite things about being a part of the medicine and conscious community is how interwoven it is, and just all of the ways in which these groups of people come together. And I feel the deeper I get into my work, the circle is simultaneously growing, but it's also becoming even more tighter knit, because you're like, oh wow, this is all the same people doing all the same things. And it's just really exciting to see everyone who's involved.
Yeah, it's expanding and refining.
Yes.
World. I want to learn, and I want you to share with our audience more about you and who you are and your origin story. Do you mind sharing a bit about that with us?
Yeah, I will. It's always interesting because I feel like I have what is my 9 to 5 professional background that I offer, and then my regular self. And so I try to blend them as much as I can because they are very related. But yeah, I'm Shante Little. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in Chalmette, Louisiana, on Chitimacha territory here, and back on ancestral lands. I moved back to Louisiana 5 years ago. So that was in 2017. I was finishing a career as a professional track and field athlete, which was one of my other lifetimes I've lived since being on this plane. And I knew that I needed something different. I knew I needed to go somewhere and couldn't figure out where that was. I didn't want to go back to where I had grown up, but I had no desire, really, nothing that was pulling me elsewhere. And I was planning a birthday trip, and I was like, I'm going to take myself to New Orleans. I'm going to be a history nerd and go do all this stuff, whatever. And so I started planning this trip, and then I was like, let me just see if there's a job. And my background is in education. So my background is in access to higher education and educational leadership. I was a college counselor. So that's where a lot of my passions lie, and also kind of undergirds this work, because I think it's all tied together. And so on a whim, I was like, let me just see if there's a job. And I found the perfect listing at the perfect time, and it was everything I wanted. And within a month and a half, I was flying out for the interview and then got the position. And then a couple months later, packed my car and moved out here. And so all of that kind of, I feel like sets the tone for my background. It's a lot of just, I follow what I'm called to do, and when things are in alignment, they tend to unfold exactly as they're supposed to. And so I was a professional track and field athlete for a bit. Right after college, I moved to Arizona, and I was training at Altus, which was formerly known as the World Athletic Center. And I got injured, and that is a whole other long story. But because I was resisting some very necessary change in a true tower moment, for folks familiar with the tarot, I got injured, and I ended up with stress fractures in my back, and I had to take 8 weeks out, and realized how much I didn't want to go back because it wasn't my passion and I wasn't doing it for me and all of these things. And that was really the catalyst, I think, for for me to truly allow my spiritual self to take the lead. I have been working in spiritual practices since I was 15. That's when I first picked up a tarot deck and first started reading cards. Before then, I was reading palms and working with local plants. So really self-guided through my early teen years. And then in my early 20s, started to get a little bit more formal with my studies and really focusing on Eastern Woodlands medicine, which is on either side of the Mississippi. My ancestry is tied to the First Nations Abenaki. And so being able to really specialize in those medicines, as well as the medicines that are carried down the Mississippi into Louisiana, where the rest of my ancestry is. And so before I even knew those things, that's what I was studying and familiarizing myself with, and learning the plants and the medicines around me, just because I was introverted and I was an only child for a really long time. And I was also the only brown person in my town in New Hampshire. And so it was the perfect environment for me to start developing this like deep connection with my inner self. But it wasn't really until kind of getting shaken up out of, you have to stop pretending like this is not the life that you actually want to live, like checking these boxes and doing these things that other people define as successful. It wasn't really until then that I was like, oh yeah, like I get to make the rules. All of these things that I loved, when I was younger but didn't feel like I could take seriously or whatnot, I started to allow them to take center stage, and everything has just kind of flowed from there. I don't know if I hope I covered. I was planning to go a little bit more linearly, and then it just started going. And so I knew I was going to get back.
Go with it.
You did. I think that's so fantastic. I'm curious if you've always known about your First Nations ancestry and have been very close to it, or if that's something you discovered along your journey.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I'm trying to think of what's the simplest way to. I grew up knowing about I did not grow up knowing about my Creole history. I grew up knowing about Black Native history. And this is so funny. Okay, so the history that I grew up knowing actually matched my actual biological history. I came into knowing about my biological history in my mid-20s, just when I found out about my biological father. And so I learned that the ancestry that I had grown up with knowing as mine in these very particular lineages was actually not the same, but there were overlaps. So my grandmother that I grew up with is from Cebu City in the Philippines. And so, I grew up thinking that I was Filipina and I still maintain a lot of aspects just of what my grandmother taught me. And then, found out, actually, no, I'm not Filipina. And my family has Louisiana Creole history, but there was a Black Indigenous line that carried over. So it was just like, oh, this still tracks, but not the same paternal lineage or the same maternal line, if that makes sense.
It does.
Very, very convoluted. But it was one of those things when it was like, wow, like when things are meant to be as they are. And so even in that unfolding and being like, whoa, like, wait a minute, who am I? Here is this common thread. And that was actually really, I think, grounding for me, and kind of allowed me to connect deeper with spirit and with my ancestors, because it's like, oh, I really am yours. And there's no denying it. And so that was really powerful for me.
It's beautiful.
Wow. The first part of what you said, I was getting chills as you were speaking, because when somebody remembers who they are beyond like external validation or what we think we have to do to exist in this world, I'm getting chills like as I'm saying it. It's beyond it's beyond anything that you can even explain to other people. So like even though you thought that you were going like, I could
Yeah.
feel it viscerally in my body like what that meant to you.
Oh,
And
I love that.
just finding out your roots and your ancestry, I'm sure gave you so many answers to a lot of unanswered questions.
Yes. And even just like reaffirm, like reaffirmed things that I have known, or just all of the ways in which things come full circle from like what I studied when I was in undergrad. I majored in African diaspora studies. And so I focused primarily on Black American history and Black literature, and all of these different things, and also focused on like religion and art history. So I went to a liberal arts school, so I did all the things. But even thinking about like, oh, the papers I wrote and who I was reading and what I was, what I naturally gravitated towards, and then being like, oh wow, there is this bone deep connection to those things. And I think that's one of the things that reassures me that there is something higher. There is more to this, because how else could that be orchestrated?
Yeah.
Orchestrated.
And I want you to speak about how you got into herbalism, but from me, just being Britt and I are also spiritual and wellness practitioners. It sounds like without you even having to like consciously gravitate towards plants, maybe the plants were speaking to you to connect deeper to your roots. Because I'm sure the plants that you work with are indigenous to the lands that you, like your ancestral lands.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah, that is a through line. Like I said, I grew up in New Hampshire. My grandparents' house is on 7 acres and it's just woods. And I was an only child for 11 years of my life. And so I spent all my time just occupying myself. I was always outside and always just like interested in animals and all of those things, because I was so isolated, I think. And I think that just allowed me to naturally just be curious about, the things that were around me. I wanted to look at rocks, and I had a little crystal collection, and all of those things, like for all of the kind of like witchy woo-woo kids that are now grown up, like I think a lot of us have those commonalities. But yeah, there was something, my grandparents have a wall of books, and again, because I was so isolated, like I was definitely a reader and all of these things, and I was always looking for things to occupy me. And I remember like coming across one. Do you remember when people used to have those like encyclopedia sets?
Oh, we did.
Yes.
Yeah, we had the World Book. We had 8 million of them. Yep.
Yes. So all of those. I can't tell you how many of those I got. Like, Nana, thank you, but what are you doing? So many gifts of those. But I would look through them and just find what did interest me. And so I remember like looking through something where I first heard about like an essential oil or whatnot, and being like, oh, like a plant can do something. Or even just like, I loved magic, and that was a thing that I escaped into. And so seeing in a text that, oh, plants can, like, I never knew that a flower could do this thing and have an effect on a person or whatnot. And so that really just opened the door, and I started studying just for myself, and kind of continued that, like I said, through my teenage years of just learning about what was growing in around me, the plants that, learning about the trees that grew around me, what could be done with them, always just trying to find out like, what are the other uses? There's always something else. And I think that is what feels really magical to me. And when like I said, I got really serious about it when I was in my early 20s, and I was living in Arizona. And so I was exploring the desert and learning about like what's growing out there. And also just the transition in landscape was so fascinating to me. And so I think just, again, like I wanted to familiarize myself with what's around me and what do people have access to here and what has been used as medicine, and finding the things that either are similar or not, or looking at the ways in which things grow together in certain locations and knowing that like, oh, these all grow together because they all like work a similar system, like they heal synergistically. And so it was just all of these curiosities that I just kept, you know, reading and going online and trying to find people. I wanted these questions answered, and was simultaneously building my own herb knowledge. I forgot what your question was. I'm so sorry.
Oh no, you answered it. I was just asking
Okay.
like, you got into herbalism, and just I made a statement just about like your ancestors and how I believe that plants have a spirit, and
Yes.
when you're ready, the spirit calls out to you.
Exactly.
I honestly, I think it's like the wand in Harry Potter. Like, I think the wand chooses you, and I think the plant chooses you. I don't necessarily think that, um, at least like in my experience, I don't think that, it's an accident that like you find a mugwort or you find blue lotus. I
Right.
think you work with maybe spirits asking you to work with your dreams. So like I guess that was more of a statement, but then I was asking like how you got into herbalism.
Yeah, no, I love that. And yes, because I think of the times when I've come across something and it has been exactly what I needed and I didn't know at the time, or just thinking about living in an area and like, why is white pine so abundant here? Because of all of the uses it has and all of the ways in which it serves the people that live in that environment. And so, yes, I think spiritually the plants are communicating with us. And I think also just like, because you can't separate the science and the spirituality of it. And so even just thinking of like the way that biodiversity shows up and these ecosystems, and again, this is all designed to actually support life. Yeah, I think everyone also has like, I was thinking of one of my best friends who's also an herbalist, and she has a really deep relationship with lady's mantle and bloodwort. And there are so many stories where these flowers have, where these flowers driving me, where these flowers have shown up in the most interesting ways. And I have stories for days about it, but it's like, yeah, wow, there's something deeper to this. There is this connection like between you and this plant, and why it's showing up in this way. And so, yeah, I definitely agree with that.
How did your work with herbs coincide with your work with psilocybin?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, y'all. She's licking her paw.
My dog used to do that. My dog growing up used to drive me bananas. Yeah.
Go see him. Go ahead. I can't. I try so hard and I get distracted real easily. And I'm like, Shante, just focus. Cannot. Yeah. So with psilocybin, actually, I love this. This is my favorite thing because I feel like they just go hand in hand. Like I said, because I was always interested in herbalism and like, what can I do with these plants? What can I do with them in my spiritual work? What can I do with them in my healing work? And then integrating the two, because those also go hand in hand. I was already experimenting with some of our other more potent healers and some of the visionary herbs or some of the plants that induce hallucination, like our psychoactive plants and things like that, just because I was interested in them. And I want to develop a deep relationship with anything that I'm working with. And so I was already using some of these plants, just even in my own maintenance, in my own spiritual work, and anything that I was doing when I needed to kind of rely on higher sight or deepen my connection with my intuition or open up some channels so that I could process things and whatnot. And simultaneously, at one point, I was getting really deep into my healing work in therapy and was kind of at a point where I was acknowledging some very real like residual effects of trauma, and that was manifesting in complex PTSD and anxiety and depression, and was like, wow, like I actually need help. Like there are some chemical things here and I need help. And so as my therapist and I were having this conversation about like, what does that look like? You know, do you go on a prescription or whatnot? I was always very clear with her that, you know, my intention is not to have to stay on this forever. Like if in a perfect world, not for any reason other than I think my pride and just wanting to do it on my own. And so I was looking into, because I'd already been, you know, using adaptogens and using my own nervines and things to help with my stress response and all of those things. And I can't remember where I came across it, but I somewhere on, I don't know, online, somewhere stumbled upon a study about psilocybin and how they've been using it to treat PTSD, or studies that they had way back when on PTSD in veterans. And I was like, oh, that's so, you know, that's so interesting. I hadn't heard that before. I was familiar with entheogenic mushrooms and whatnot, just because of the herbalist background, but I hadn't heard of that. And so that to me was like, oh, this is a light at the end of the tunnel that I have to follow, because this is what I'm looking like. I do want to treat myself with a plant medicine, but it is not just healing the body. Like now we're talking about what's going on with neural pathways. Like we're talking about making new connections in the brain and really breaking up some of these things. And so the more I was reading about psilocybin, the more I was like, oh, this could really be it. And had brought it up to my therapist, who's actually a psilocybin advocate herself. And she was very interested. And she was like, you know, I've also heard this, you know, I've done my own research and whatnot. Like, obviously things are still pretty underground, and Louisiana is going to be real late to the party, I'm sure, when it comes to any of this. But she encouraged me to keep, you know, looking into it and whatnot. And again, that's up my alley. Like, I would rather learn myself. Like, let me go read all of the things and let me explore and let me experiment and whatever. And I'm also of the mind that if it comes from the ground or grows on a tree, like, I'll try it. I've always been very adverse to just like medication in general, or traditional medicine, whether it's like cough like all of those things. Y'all, I'm a conspiracy theorist as well. I say that proudly. So don't get me started on the food systems and what's going on and all of that. But because of that, I've always just been like, why not go the simple route? Like, if I can go find this outside and I can dry this and I can make a tea out of it, or I can encapsulate it or whatever, why not do that, as opposed to put something in my body that might have other effects that I now have to treat, or might disrupt something else, or I don't know what the long-term effects are or whatever. So I've always been like, look, if I can go and pick it myself, whatever. And I had never tried entheogenic mushrooms before. I'd never worked with psilocybin. And I was like, well, I want to try this. But I'm also, because of my spiritual work, where I source things from is very important to me, and the energy with which something is cultivated and all of that. And I could not find a place where I could actually obtain medicine. And so I kind of put it out of my mind. And then I was out like hiking and was coming across like oyster mushrooms and chicken of the woods and was
Oh,
like,
where are you hiking?
I know.
Mississippi, Red Bluff in Mississippi, great spot, but also we have a lot of oyster mushrooms out here, especially in the North Shore. So if anyone goes to like Fountain Blue State Park or oyster mushrooms, and reishi down by the river. So so I'm like, is God trying to give me some psilocybin mushrooms? And I was just like, I wonder. But then I was looking and I'm like, they don't really grow here. Like, I don't know. And so I'm finding all these other things. And then I noticed I have a garden where I grow all of my medicinal herbs and spiritual herbs. And I noticed like some little wood loving fungi popping up there. And I was like, I really believe in spirit, and they do, throw things my way sometimes. And I'm like, if a psilocybin mushroom pops up out of this mulch that I bought from Home Depot, it's a wrap. It didn't happen. It did not happen.
Oh, I was like, what?
I wish it did not happen, but it did make me think, I'm growing all of this other stuff. Like how hard could it be? Could I do that? And so started looking into like, what does it take to grow this medicine? And came across all of the Reddit bros with their petri dishes and their goggles and their beakers and all of that stuff. And I totally respect it. And it obviously works really well. And it's not my jam. I can't do that. And so I was able to find spores and looked into like, okay, well, how do you actually cultivate this? Midwest Grow Kits, great place for supplies. Got the materials I needed and was basically like, all right, well, let's see what happens. And so the first psilocybin mushrooms that I ever tried were ones that I grew myself. And as I was thinking about, okay, like I need to, prepare for this, I'm going to start using them. It was really important to me to try every dose. And so, because I wanted to see, how does this work with my body? What's happening? And also because of the promise of the medical benefits and the healing that, is offered by this medicine, knowing that like, if this is something that helps me, then I need it. I need to put it out there for other people. Like, that's just what it means to me to be of service. And so it was really important for me, like, even in my spiritual work, I'm going to do everything myself first. Like, if I can't heal myself through this, like, I have no business trying to heal you through whatever. And so I worked myself up from 0.25 grams all the way up to 7 and experienced it all and just allowed myself to truly understand like each experience and what this meant. And I was also, integrating with my therapist, letting her know, like we were logging everything just to see like what happens. I've been working with my therapist for 4 years, and what has happened in the last 2 years is unbelievable. And she says it all the time, like I'll come back from a journey or an experience and she will be like, this is months and months of work. And so because I was going into this with this very clear intention of like, how am I going to heal myself? Knowing that psilocybin works in a very particular way in the brain on the serotonin receptors, the way in which it increases neuroplasticity and helps to support and strengthen the development of new neural connections and whatnot. Like, understanding how it worked in the brain made me want to also think of like, well, what else is complementary to this? How do I give myself the best environment or container or whatever to receive this healing, and how can I further support this medicine? And so that is like one of the reasons why I was like, okay, so if I know that it's going to work here, let me see if this would pair well with something like an ashwagandha or something like reishi, or put it together with, if I'm working on some deep emotional, you know, core trauma that's tied to my womb or whatever, like, how else can I support that area while I'm going under with this medicine, with the intention of, you know, working through some of these things. And so I try to think of it as this very, like, I don't know if the word is symbiotic. I think that's the word, but like this relationship where all of the things just kind of like fit together. I don't believe anything works in isolation.
I agree.
Yeah.
Do you lay down and put like the thing over your eyes and just lay down, or do you like go on walks? Like, how do you take in the medicine?
Yeah, so it depends. For me, if I am doing anything, I found for myself anything under like 3.5 grams, I will kind of like go through. I always start off any experience the same way. Like, I clean through my house. I make sure like my space is cleared out, you know, physically in this plane as well as energetically. I make sure that I have, you know, everything that I could possibly need and whatnot. If I am doing under 3 grams, then I will, if I'm feeling creative, then maybe that's a time where I'm like, I know that I want to be writing, or I know that I want to create something with my hands or whatnot. So I might do that while I'm journeying. Going to the river, like going and sitting, just watching the water, or maybe it was last month or the month before on a trip to Texas, like dosing and being by the creek in San Antonio and, you know, just watching the sky. And so I like to, if I'm doing what feels like a lower to moderate dose, then I like to be in nature, connecting or tapping into something creative. If I am doing a higher dose with the intention of journeying, then my preferred setup, I love my bedroom. So I set up my bedroom the way that I want. I have my, you know, my candles and my incense and what I do, all the things, just to make me feel like, okay, yes, like I can really tap in here. And I usually start on my bed. I'll be like laying or sitting down, whatever kind of, I usually will we'll usually prepare a tea, and sometimes I will start drinking it in the bath, because I also like to do like a spiritual bath and just like relax beforehand.
Uh-oh. I think she froze.
Oh wait, you froze.
Oh, is that back?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want it to go back unstable.
We'll wait
Is
a
it?
couple seconds.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay. So yeah, so I will wait to kind of feel the medicine drop in, and then it really depends on what's going on. Like sometimes I'll feel the need to kind of really like move things through my body. And so I might be like stretching or moving through some like yoga flows and whatnot, just to help release some of that stagnant energy or help kind of facilitate that movement. Sometimes I am just laying and I am deep in whatever time loop I'm in or whatnot. And I am not in my physical body, but I am laying in that bed. So yeah, it really depends on where the medicine needs to take me. I set an intention and I'll know what I want to work through, but I always show up as an observer in my experiences. And so it very much is like, whatever I need to be shown, whatever it is that I need to experience, whatever it is that needs to happen, like I'm just here to observe that. And so I really try to, allow my body and the medicine to lead first, instead of me thinking about like, only lay down, or make sure you listen to this kind of music, or, whatever. So yeah, and I think it's person by person for sure.
So I want to talk about the role in psilocybin and healing in general for marginalized groups, specifically BIPOC, queer BIPOC, people that are disabled. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Hell, women, and I mean, just there's so many, there's a hole in the, I don't know if the hole is in the industry or the hole is in the representation or lack thereof of people of color, people who are queer in these industries. But I'd love you to speak to your experience on that, on both sides, as the healer and the person that's receiving the healing.
Yes, that is, I love this question. This is one of my favorite topics. And I have a lot to say about it. Where to start? I think that what we're seeing is, again, the co-opting of something that is inherent and natural to the human experience, which is healing directly connected to the earth. With many of the wellness practices, which I'm sure y'all can attest to, whether it is Reiki or if it is pranayama or breath work or whatever, we're seeing a co-opting of that for obviously a commercial return. We're seeing the commodification of these medicines and whatnot. And because of that, the filter through which these practices are being presented out into the larger public is through that lens of white cishet male capital, and white cishet women who go by shamaness and so on and so forth. And so I think it's not that the healers are not there, and it's not that the representation is not there. It is the filter through which we're seeing it, because I mean, y'all know, once you get into this community, there's a very deep, a very rich BIPOC community within entheogenic medicines and psychedelics. We are real deep out here, and
we are here.
We are. And there's the community. I rave about it because every single person that I have come in contact with and have communicated with and have built with is just incredible. And everyone is truly here to make sure that we put the medicine back into the hands of the people. And so we're here, whether or not some of these larger corporations that now want to monetize something that has the power to heal people, because we know that they're not actually interested in healing anyone because they don't make money off of people being well. These same corporations are not going to be prioritizing, the fact that there are millions of BIPOC people who are suffering from PTSD and suffering from, other trauma-related illnesses and whatnot. And so, yeah, I have a lot to say on that part, just with what I think is going on in the space, and where I think there are some organizations that are really trying and that are doing their part to try to bridge that gap and implement intersectionality and DEI considerations into the work that they're doing, like the International Microdosing Association. They've been great. And I love a lot of the work that they're doing. And I've seen where they've been putting in some of that intention and knowing that, like, yes, we operate from the maybe more of the scientific and medical space or side of things, as opposed to the folks who are grassroots and are really like decolonize all of this and we're going straight like earth to mouth with our healing. So I see them trying to bridge that gap and do that. But yeah, there's a lot that's happening on the ground, and it's just not getting as much. It's not getting as much traction. It's not getting as much attention. And because of that, it makes it really hard for those movements to strengthen, because there are groups out there that are, you know, making sure that BIPOC people have access to medicine at cost or free or sliding scale. There are folks that, you know, do free ceremonies for BIPOC folks or for the queer community. We are all out there doing that, but because that is not what garners like the attention of the folks who have the capital to really kind of pour into these movements and these efforts to, in a way that would allow us to scale. I think that's where it seems like, oh, well, where if I'm someone, you know, and I'm in Hartford, Connecticut, and I like heard something, Mike Tyson said some shit about psilocybin, like, where do I go? Like, you don't know where to go. And it looks like your only option is very white, very wealthy.
Mary from Indiana, who went on to Peru one time and is now a shaman because she's been taking mushrooms, dosing herself for 6 months, and she's ready to share it with the world. She got a drum.
It's just because we don't know that there are people, because I don't know, but I have so much faith in this community because I see what's already happening, and I see how loud folks are being, and I see the ways in which it's already growing, and it just feels like a cumulative like wave that's happening. And I think the other part of it, the other reason why I have so much faith in this community is because when it comes to plant medicine, anyone can cultivate. And the way in which the mushroom is designed, like by the grace of God, the fact that they release however many spores at whatever moment, and the fact that they can travel, and you can have a spore that now is inoculating in some mulch in Louisiana that like started in California or whatever. You can't stop access to it, because we're already growing it, we're already cultivating it, and we're already sharing the knowledge, and we're already passing it on. And each time a person learns how to cultivate something, the fact that they can then give that out to their community and someone can cultivate from there, it's never ending. And we're all really deeply invested in this kind of circular, I don't even like this, I don't know what to call it, but just this thing, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I like what you said about our community, which is like I think that that's a metaphor for the mycelium network. Like, we're not maybe as seen because we're just like mushrooms growing in mulch. Like, no, we're not glamorous. Nobody wants to like feed into us, but it doesn't matter because we're already doing it. We're already connecting. We're already doing the work. So it's like, regardless if we're given the platforms or these resources, we feed into each other.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Well, and the wisdom, I think, is in our communities. I mean, you said a lot of really powerful things, especially throughout this conversation, and just understanding that the community exists, the communities that are filtered out of the public eye, so to speak, or filtered out of the collective vision that we all sort of see, is still there, and it's thriving, and it's, like you said, coming in like a wave. I wonder if you have experienced, or even as your work as someone who facilitates and supports people throughout these journeys, if you've seen any hurdles that BIPOC experience around plants and fungi, and understanding that and reconnecting to nature in this way.
Yes. Do you mean hurdles in the sense of
Social, familial,
gotcha.
psychological,
Yes.
the things that tell us that we're not supposed to do that.
Yes. She's gonna drive me nuts. Oh, Lord. Yes, so I think one of the biggest things first is like stigma and stereotype. This has like long been this perception of psychedelics, and even just the name psychedelics. That's why we're moving away from that and using entheogens, because psychedelics in itself carries so much weight from what people have heard about LSD and ecstasy and all of these things. So I think stigma first. I think particularly for, I will say for the Black community, I won't generalize for the BIPOC community, but particularly for the Black community, psychedelics are for white people. It's just not something that our community has really dabbled in or explored. It is something that has kind of like been an other. You have to leave that paw alone. And so I think there's a little bit of this of like, oh, like I'm not messing with that. Like, so there's that kind of just like resistance. I think also with anything unfamiliar, there's even the apprehension to learn and to acknowledge that, this maybe isn't what you think it is. Like, yes, there are many people who go and they just trip and they are having a great time, and there's space for that as well. And it doesn't just have to be that. And so I really think the first part is just like familiarizing folks so that they have an understanding. And again, this is where it comes back to representation, because when Lil Boosie has a video of him on shrooms driving a goddamn car and that's not the representation that we need for our folks.
Lil Boosie's a problem all by himself, though, on every level.
I can't
leave that there.
But like, even in that, it's like, that's not, and even with Mike Tyson, who I'm actually loving the conversation that he's starting, but like, that is what Black folks need to see more of. The fact that, oh, this can actually, there is a use case. Like, here is this evidence of,
and Lizzo,
of what can be done, and even SZA and Lil Nas X, and talking about how it supported their creativity or how it supported their, deep healing or whatever the case may be. Like, those things do help. And even what I've seen just in folks who have reached out to me and people that I know in my own community, like they're starting to hear little things. And then it's like, okay, well, like, what's really up with this? Like, one of my friends said that they took shrooms and like said it changed his life, but like, what's really good? And so there's just, I think there's also just like the lack of information, because it is still very underground. And unless you know where to go to look for it, it's not there. Like I said, our community is very, very very rich. And, but you wouldn't know if you didn't know where to look for it. I had this conversation with a coworker of mine, and she had, no idea. She's been having conversations with her friends, and they're all in their later 30s and represent a very particular demographic. And, she reached out to me because she was like, I thought I was crazy. And like, my friends are looking at me like I'm batshit. And like, why are you looking into going and doing a healing ceremony and having a retreat experience? Why aren't you buying a car? Why aren't you putting a down payment on a house and whatnot? And so even for her, the conversation within her community is, there's so much either just like distrust or dismissal And then like, where do you turn? You go online and you're going to come across the Reddit threads, or you're going to come across, like, there are some, you know, great educational resources, but it's not always accessible for folks. It's not always inclusive. It's not always written in a way that people are going to be able to take something from it. And so I think that's the other piece, is like, how do we make sure that we're putting out information in all of the different ways, whether it is people who are like Black PhDs who are specifically studying, you know, how psilocybin works on the brain, or if it is our, you know, BIPOC facilitators, or if it is someone who's coming from a spiritual lens, or if it's, you know, a former Black athlete that is speaking about how it's helped them getting over, you know, CTE or whatever the case may be. It's just like, I think that's the biggest thing, is just there's not enough clear paths to the information.
Well, it goes back to what you said, the intention of why you're using the medicine. And I think a lot of people now, or the misconception is like bypassing. You want to
Yeah.
take psychedelics, you want to take ayahuasca and all these plant medicines to like escape your reality, where you're talking about is more intentional. Like, I want to heal, I want to discover more about myself. And um, the the separation there for a lot of people is the separation between our experience here as physical spiritual beings, and a lot of people, I think, aren't necessarily spiritually attuned, because when you took that medicine you knew what to do with that information, because you were already like in your spiritual journey. And that was my experience too. I had never done any kind of substances ever, like not even any kind of like drug or anything, until my spiritual journey. And that's when I started getting into like psychedelics and psilocybin. And thank goodness, because when I go into the trip, it's so deeply healing. But then the integration process after, I think, was more important. Like,
Yes,
what was
absolutely.
that what was that all about? Like, now what do I do? How did I apply that to my physical life and my reality? And I see a lot of these celebrities talking about their ayahuasca journeys, and now it's like cool to like get out of your body and not deal with your physical reality. I don't know if there was a
Mhm.
question in there, but I think that's like where that's where like I think the divide is like people don't understand like the spiritual and the physical nature of our beingness.
Yeah, it also makes me, something that it also made me think of as you were talking about like integration, I think something else that contributes to this disconnect, like I think of the fact that, and particularly within BIPOC communities, within the Black community, we are not always even equipped to deal with what integration requires, which, you know, may mean that we have to get vulnerable and kind of, you know, work through different feelings that we're having, or, you know, just even open ourselves up to the consideration of, you know, of being able to think about something in a different way. Or I think there's, and this just goes into like what mental health care looks like in these communities and whatnot. Like, so we're already missing a lot of tools in general, and society in general is already not prioritizing a lot of these skills that are needed to show up as your full human self, which is the combination of the physical and the spiritual, and being able to connect with, you know, your intuition, being able to again, like, feel your feelings and move them through the body and release them in a certain way, being able to have emotional intelligence and break down something. So there's like, it's almost as if we're already operating from a deficit. And then here is this representation that's just saying, oh yeah, go do psychedelics, go take ayahuasca, you know, whatever. And there are a lot of people who are administering these medicines in a way that is unethical, and are not doing screenings and are not doing intakes and are not actually sitting with their clients and knowing, you know, what is this process that we're getting into. And so people are being, you know, sink or swim. And that's why we then hear all of these stories about, you know, the bad trips and this, that happened. And that just contributes again to the cycle of stereotype and stigma. And it's just like a never ending loop.
I want to speak to that, which is, Laura and I were chatting about this before, but that there is there isn't a lot of discussion on keeping ourselves well during these experiences. You mentioned that a lot of people of color, specifically the Black community, but other people of color and other marginalized groups may not necessarily have what it takes to, may not have the space to integrate their experiences because we have to always wear this armor, because we don't have the time to slow down for a second and listen and integrate, because we don't necessarily have the support of like a doctor or a therapist or a spiritual therapist or someone to help us integrate these experiences. And because there's so much judgment for those outside of this world, for those outside of the psychedelic world, that we're not giving each other the room to heal. And so we keep creating these cycles of harm within these communities. And it's so unintentional, but it's being perpetuated by groups that aren't being responsible, like you were saying, that again, we're going to just use the example of Mary, and that's a random name. I don't know the person specifically, but Mary from Indiana with a drum, who decided that she knows what she's doing because she's been taking mushrooms for 6 months on and off, and therefore can serve, and doesn't like you said, doesn't do an intake form, and wouldn't know what to do with that information if she did, doesn't find out what medicines you're on. And so I just want to talk about that, and hopefully we can leave some resources. I know that your page specifically offers a lot of resources to taking it responsibly, to integrating psilocybin in your life responsibly, so that you can actually heal and not do more harm. There was like Laura said, a kind of a question in there.
No, I love that. That's so real. And I think, and I love what you said about BIPOC folks and queer folks and anyone else who is marginalized, who are not only dealing with the trauma of their individual lives, but the collective trauma, as well as the trauma related to their identity of just showing up in the world every day. And then what does that mean to go have an experience and then you still have to show up and deal with your bullshit ass job on Monday? Like, what does that mean? And how do you make space for that? And so I think for me, like a lot of conversations that I have with folks, and I primarily work with Black and Indigenous women, but I have a small group of Black cishet men that I work with that have actually been great, because I've been able to connect them with other brothers in the space who can speak specifically to their needs. I think affinity groups are so important. But a conversation that I have with them a lot, and keeping these things in mind, because as much as my conscious self wants to say that healing is not exclusive, it is, and there is a privilege to being able to heal and to be able to invest in your healing in these ways. And so that, that has to be named. And so I think with keeping those things in mind, a conversation that I have with a lot of folks is via microdosing. It's not the answer for everyone. Some people do start, with a journey or whatever, and are able to spend the time preparing so that they can secure, 3 days and plan ahead for that and whatever. But one of the beauties of microdosing is that with the combination of intention, like you can start your healing journey while you're in the shit, and in a way that is manageable and attainable to you, but that also allows you to create, at least the way that I like to think about it, and a lot of the practitioners that I work and connect with, in a way that allows you to create these small rituals for healing and taking these little moments for yourself, to kind of dedicate that. Maybe it's a shorter amount of time, but it's more frequent, and, just ways to kind of, how do you create this little space for yourself? And also in a way that, if you are dealing with like family pressure or what folks have to say or whatever, like there's just different ways to introduce it. I also don't remember, and I'm really sorry, but I wanted to say that. And so
You don't have to apologize.
I'm like, I don't remember, but it needed to be said. So I don't know.
I'm really curious. Like, I know that like there's certain groups of indigenous people who have a relationship to like ayahuasca and San Pedro um and like certain plants have that relationship with certain indigenous groups. Does psilocybin have that? Like, or is it just everyone has their right to it?
Yeah. So similar, I guess I'll speak to psilocybin as well as amanita, which is the famed red mushroom, red cap with the white dots. Both of these particular species of mushrooms have roots and very storied histories in multiple locations and often at the same time. And so there are, I think, I would say like a psilocybin practice or whatnot, I think when it comes down to certain ways that someone might facilitate or administer a ceremony, that might be closed and that might come from someone's particular like Aztec lineage or another example. Sorry, y'all bear with me. So I think similar to how I would talk about like magic or spiritual practice, like anyone can work a candle. But when it comes down to working a candle in a root the way that Louisiana hoodoo does versus someone who's maybe involved in Lukumi or Santeria or something like that, or maybe someone who is a like Celtic druid witch or whatever, like this is something that everyone has history to that dates all the way back. So oftentimes you may not be able to tell where it necessarily stems from or whatever. But there are still kind of like particular ways in which we use a substance. And so thinking particularly about Mesoamerica and like the use of cacao and psilocybin together. And that is something that is very deeply embedded in that culture. And so making sure that we pay homage to that and not marketing some unicorn psilocybin cacao dust, whatever. No, we can't do that. So I think that's kind of how it works. Similarly with amanita, like we know that there are Celtic roots to amanita. We know that there are roots that are in like Serbia and other places. And so it's more so of, I would say it pertains to kind of the locale of where the medicine is sourced, because we also know that these species, like again, they grow in different locations. And so within that region, within that particular space, how is it being utilized? How are they serving this medicine or partaking in it? Even thinking about the way that the Greeks used psilocybin when we're talking about the Eleusinian mysteries and Persephone. So it's just, that's the kind of the way that I think about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you one more question as we wrap up, which is, what work do you think BIPOC has to do to continue to decolonize these and make better, right? Recreate a better world, and the same for white body people.
Yes, I think for BIPOC folks first, I think there's two pieces to this. I think first and foremost, it's about feeling entitled to the medicine. I think, again, because a lot of this healing feels very exclusionary and people feel boxed out of it, or again, they don't know how to find their entry point into it or whatnot. Claim your birthright. Like, as children of the earth, all of us have a birth. Like, it is all of our birthright to work with earth medicines and plant medicines. And so no one should feel, and this also goes for white-bodied folks, no one should feel as if, they can't work with a medicine or partake in that form of healing. And so for BIPOC in particular, because I don't want to say that out loud. For BIPOC in particular, I think that there is often a reluctance or a hesitance or an apprehension, or even just like, what are all of the perceptions of when we do actually take up the space to be entitled to something? And I think that when people of color are entitled and express that entitlement, I think that that creates a lot of discomfort. And so when I think of the sisters that I'm working with in the space, like Mama Dele Miko, Michaela, or Nohea, the modern mage, they are so loud and so unapologetic, and they give no fucks. And they know what is rightfully theirs. And they show up and they claim it. Same thing with like Brother Peace and Akira Mesu and like Darren LeBaron, like, yes, I'm gonna be front and center and I'm going to lead this conversation because I can and because it's mine to do so. And so I think for those of us who are practitioners in this space, like we have to continue to show up and say like, yeah, my voice matters. I got an invitation to speak at a microdosing summit, and my topic is on how microdosing might be able to be used in healing racialized trauma, because y'all need to talk about it. And I'm not going to pussyfoot around some other topic because that's more palatable. And if you say no, you say no, and I'm going to post about it on social media. So
Yes.
it's just like, we have to, and we have to be comfortable doing that and just asserting ourselves in the space. And I think the other part of it is, yes, again, continue sharing the resources and continue talking about it, and talk about it with your friends and your family. And what's the word? Like, just normalize the practice and the information so that it becomes a little bit less scary, or, you know, something that people are more open to kind of, you know, taking into consideration. I think for white-bodied folks, creating that space and not just championing other like BIPOC facilitators and groups that are doing the work and whatnot, but like actually uplifting them, actually working with them, actually centering these voices in a way like that's not you really having to try to do it. It just comes naturally to you, where of course I'm going to have this person at the table. And of course, I think of, so Michaela Valentino and Ankara Kiru were my teachers with Cosmic Gatekeepers in their facilitator training. And Ankara is a white-bodied cishet man, and I wouldn't even feel right to call him an ally, because I feel like an ally is a name that you have to like give someone, and he doesn't need that. He didn't have to think twice about, obviously, Michaela is going to be the person that I'm going to co-facilitate this with. And our community is already diverse, and we're already centering these Black folks because we just do that naturally in our conversations in this space. And we're going to talk about what it means. Like, of course, we're going to have land acknowledgements. And of course, we're going to talk about the history of this medicine, because how dare you call yourself a practitioner if you don't know where it comes from? And so I think of people like Ankara, and I'm like, yeah, that's what we need y'all to do. Mike James, who's out of the Hate Street shop, same kind of thing. Like, these are the folks who they are just naturally working with BIPOC folks. And I know that that's not an answer. People are going to be like, well, how do you just do it? And I don't know how to tell you that, because
perfect.
I don't know.
You just do it.
You just do it. I don't know why you don't do it.
Right.
Yeah. So that's, yeah.
Yeah. Like,
it also helps to have an example. Sorry, Laura, to have an example of someone to mimic and be like, so that you can then attempt to just do it. Sorry, Laura,
Yeah,
what
and
you gonna say?
just seeing like this is how you do it the right way. And like if you do want to host a retreat or a ceremony or whatever, be very mindful of what you're administering. If you are not a curandera, like maybe don't offer a limpia and something before your ceremony, and like that's how you're presenting it to folks. Like if you want to offer a particular medicine practice, why don't you go find someone where like that is what they do and that is what they come from. Like you don't have to do it yourself. You can include those things without you being the one to administer it or to deliver the healing in that way or to speak about the thing. You can extend the invite.
Yeah.
And I even think for me and how I work within my community, I know the folks. Like I know if I have a brother who hits me up and he fits a very particular type of demographic within the Black cishet male community, I'm going to know who I'm going to pull to, because it's not for me to do this. I'm going to go get someone who can. If I know that I have a woman who is, she is pregnant and she wants to talk about like entheogenic medicine during her pregnancy and postpartum, like I'm going to go to Michaela and Nohea because that is their wheelhouse. That's their area of expertise. And that's just how we operate. Like, I know what I can do and I know what these other folks can do. So just make the connections. You don't lose anything by doing that. You deepen your community. So that's my soapbox.
Yeah, I love that. Well, all I was going to add was, again, it's like the medicine is helping us feel deeply rooted to the earth. And when we all feel deeply rooted to the earth, we just automatically extend the
Yeah.
work to other people. It's not something that's like it's not in it, even in our consciousness. We just do it because we feel deeply rooted to each other. So yeah,
I love that. Yes, exactly.
thank you so much. This
Thank
was
y'all.
such a beautiful and rich conversation, and we can't wait to like hear about what you're doing next and where you
Yes.
are in this world. We want to see you on the cover of like psilocybin today or something.
Daily.
That's not, y'all. I'm manifesting a farm in my own retreat space.
Amazing.
Putting it out there, doing the research, figuring it out, and that's the plan. So y'all can come host a retreat at my wellness center.
Done.
We're there.
Right?
We're there.
Yes, we do a session for the work network, and
Gosh, yes.
yeah, I love it.
I love what Pablo Picasso said. He said, everything imagined is real. So it's already happening in one timeline.
Yes, yeah, that gave me shivers. I love that.
Thank you.